She was only 6 years old, a little girl with a bright smile, a tiara, and dreams. But on the morning after Christmas, 1996, JonBenét Ramsey was found dead in her own home. And since that day, the world has been asking the same haunting question. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey?
She was 6 years old, a child who loved dressing up, who loved Christmas lights, and who had already begun to shine in local child beauty pageants. Her name was JonBenét Patricia Ramsey. To her parents, she was their princess. To the world, she soon became the face of one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in American history. On the morning of December 26, 1996, the day after Christmas, JonBenét was found brutally murdered inside her own home. Since that day, every theory, every clue, every headline has revolved around one chilling question. Who killed JonBenét Ramsey? In this documentary, we will explore the full story, the family, the crime scene, the ransom note, the suspects, the media circus, and the cultural legacy of a case that has never been solved. To understand JonBenét Ramsey's story, we need to step back into the world she was born into. JonBenét was born on August 6, 1990, in Atlanta, Georgia. She was the daughter of JonBenét Ramsey, a successful businessman who was president of Access Graphics, a software company that had recently become highly profitable. Her mother, Patricia, or Patsy Ramsey, was a former beauty queen herself. In 1977, she had been crowned Miss West Virginia, and she carried that world of pageants, dresses, and glamour with her even as she became a wife and mother. JonBenét was their youngest child. She had an older brother, Burke, born in 1987, and a half-brother, John Andrew, from John Ramsey's previous marriage. The family moved to Boulder, Colorado, where they lived in a large house valued at over $500,000 at the time, a mansion by many people's standards. Boulder was considered a quiet, safe community. The Ramseys were wealthy, well-known, and socially connected. From an early age, JonBenét was drawn into the world of child pageants. With her mother's guidance, she competed in multiple contests and often won. Photos and video clips from those pageants show a little girl with blonde curls, elaborate costumes, and a dazzling smile. Some saw her as a rising star in that small world. Others criticized the culture of child beauty pageants, arguing that it placed young children in the spotlight in troubling ways. But within the Ramsey household, JonBenét was adored. Her parents described her as full of energy, smart, and sweet-natured. The image was of a perfect family, a successful father, a glamorous mother, 2 healthy children, and a beautiful home in an affluent neighborhood. But behind that perfect exterior, there were shadows that no one could see. Because in just 6 short years, JonBenét's story would transform from that of a little girl in tiaras to the centerpiece of a national tragedy. Every great tragedy has both an internal and an external conflict. For JonBenét, the internal conflict was the pressure of being both a child and a performer. At 6 years old, she was balancing the innocent joys of childhood, like Christmas morning, with the polished, competitive world of pageants. Some critics argued later that this duality symbolized the darker tensions in her life, the vulnerability of a child exposed to a world of cameras, competition, and scrutiny. The external conflict, however, was far greater. The Ramseys were a wealthy family in a small town, and with wealth came attention. They were known, they were seen, and in a case like this, that visibility would soon become a curse. The murder of JonBenét was not just a personal tragedy, it was about to become a public spectacle, one that placed the entire family under a microscope. What was at stake was not just justice for a murdered child,
but the reputation, freedom, and very identity of the family. In the court of public opinion, everyone was about to become a suspect. The police would question the parents, the media would question the lifestyle, and the world would question whether innocence, both JonBenet's and America's, had been lost forever on that cold December night.
Christmas night in Boulder, Colorado, 1996. For most families, it was a time of joy, of presents, of gathering around the tree. For the Ramsey family, it seemed to be just that, a warm, quiet holiday evening inside their large home. JonBenet played with her Christmas gifts. The family had dinner. They said their goodnights. And then they went to bed. But what happened between that night and the following morning has remained one of the greatest mysteries in American crime history. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26th, a call was made to 911 from the Ramsey residence. Patsy Ramsey, her voice panicked and trembling, reported that her daughter was missing. She said she had gone downstairs early that morning and discovered a ransom note on the staircase. The note claimed JonBenet had been kidnapped, and it demanded a very specific amount of money, $118,000. The note instructed the Ramseys not to call the police or anyone else, warning that doing so would cost JonBenet her life. Despite those instructions, Patsy immediately called the police, then phoned family friends to come over for support. Police officers arrived at the home within minutes. At first glance, they treated the case as a kidnapping. The ransom note, 3 pages long, handwritten and oddly detailed, was the central piece of evidence. Officers secured the house, but made critical mistakes. They allowed family friends to come and go freely, contaminating the crime scene. Hours passed, but no kidnapper ever called for further instructions. The ransom note demanded money, but no steps were made to arrange for an exchange. And then, in the early afternoon, John Ramsey made a horrifying discovery. Searching the basement, he found the lifeless body of JonBenet. She was wrapped in a white blanket. There was duct tape on her mouth and a cord around her neck. A crude garrote had been fashioned from a paintbrush handle. JonBenet had suffered a fractured skull, likely from a severe blow to the head, and she had been strangled. The Ramsey home was no longer a house of safety. It was a crime scene of unimaginable horror. But from that moment forward, nothing about this case would be simple. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the snow outside, no broken windows. The ransom note, written on paper from inside the Ramsey home, raised immediate suspicion. Was this truly a kidnapping gone wrong, or was it something far more sinister?
If there is one single piece of evidence that defines the JonBenet Ramsey case, it is the ransom note. Found on the back staircase of the Ramsey home, the note was not short, not simple, not direct. It was 3 full pages, handwritten with a tone that seemed theatrical rather than criminal. The first bizarre detail, the amount of money demanded, $118,000, a strangely specific figure. Not a round number, not $1 million, not $500,000, exactly $118,000. Later investigations revealed that this was nearly identical to the year-end bonus John Ramsey had recently received at his company. Whoever wrote this note either had an intimate knowledge of John's finances, or was John himself being framed. Then there was the style of writing. The note referenced a small foreign faction, as though written by a group with military or terrorist connections. It included phrases like victory and threats written in melodramatic language. Yet experts would later analyze the handwriting and conclude it did not match any known criminal profile. It read more like the work of someone trying too hard to sound dangerous. The sheer length of the note was also unusual. In most kidnapping cases, ransom notes are short, direct, and to the point. This one rambled on for over 350 words. Many investigators believed this indicated the writer was not a hardened criminal, but someone improvising, someone inside the home with time to sit and write.
And then came the most damning discovery. The paper the note was written on came from a pad of stationery that belonged to the Ramseys themselves. The pen used was also from inside the house. This suggested that the author didn't bring prepared materials. They sat down in the Ramsey home at some point during the night and wrote it there. For many, this fact alone destroyed the credibility of the intruder theory. After all, what kidnapper breaks into a home, risks being caught, and then takes the time to compose a 3-page letter with materials found inside the very house of the victim? Handwriting experts were called in. Dozens of samples were collected from friends, employees, and, of course, the Ramseys themselves. The analysis pointed in unsettling directions. While John Ramsey was excluded as the writer, Patsy Ramsey could not be completely cleared. The similarities between her handwriting and certain elements of the ransom note were enough to keep suspicion alive. But nothing was ever definitive. Experts disagreed. Some claimed the similarities were striking. Others said they were inconclusive. What remained was a piece of evidence so strange, so unlike anything investigators had seen before, that it divided opinion for decades. The ransom note wasn't just evidence, it was a riddle. Was it written by an intruder staging a kidnapping? Was it fabricated by someone in the family to mislead investigators? Or was it a bizarre coincidence that would forever cloud the truth? Whatever the answer, the ransom note has remained the single most controversial document in American true crime history. To this day, it is studied, debated, and dissected line by line, because hidden within those 3 pages may lie the identity of JonBenet Ramsey's killer.
The initial hours of any criminal investigation are the most critical. Evidence is fresh, witness memories are clear, leads are alive. But in the case of JonBenet Ramsey, the earliest hours were a disaster. At 5:52 a.m. on December 26, 1996, a frantic Patsy Ramsey dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she told the dispatcher that her daughter had been kidnapped. Within minutes, police officers arrived at the Ramsey home. What they encountered should have immediately become a sealed crime scene. Instead, it became a revolving door. Friends of the family, neighbors, even the family's pastor all came and went freely through the house that morning. They gathered in the kitchen, moved about the rooms, and unknowingly contaminated what should have been treated as sacred ground. By the time investigators attempted to secure the scene, potential evidence had been irreversibly compromised. The ransom note, perhaps the most crucial piece of physical evidence, was handled improperly. Patsy Ramsey had carried it around. John Ramsey had read it multiple times. It was passed between officers without gloves, leaving fingerprints, oils, and fibers from countless sources. By modern forensic standards, this would be considered catastrophic. Initially, the Boulder police treated the case as a kidnapping. Their primary focus was on the ransom note, and they waited for further instructions from the so-called kidnappers. Hours passed with no phone call, no demand beyond the note itself. Meanwhile, officers searched the house superficially, not expecting to find the missing girl inside. Then came the discovery that would forever change the investigation. Detective Rick French descended into the basement, into a little-used storage room. There he saw a small blanket covering something on the floor. Beneath it was the lifeless body of JonBenet Ramsey. She'd been strangled with a homemade garrote and suffered a skull fracture. Shock rippled through the house. The case was no longer a kidnapping, it was a homicide. And from that moment, every mistake in those first hours became magnified. The handling of JonBenet's body was perhaps the most damaging of all. Instead of leaving her in place for forensic analysis, John Ramsey himself lifted his daughter's body and carried her upstairs. In that single action, fibers, hair, DNA, and positional evidence were disturbed, leaving investigators with far less than they might have had. The police now faced an impossible situation: a high-profile murder, a wealthy and influential family, and a crime scene that had been corrupted beyond repair.
From the very beginning, the investigation into JonBenet's death was set on a path of confusion, error, and suspicion.
If you're enjoying this mystery so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. More shocking cases are coming soon. An autopsy is not just a medical examination. It is a reconstruction of a final story, the last moments of a life. For JonBenét Ramsey, that story was both shocking and complex. The autopsy revealed two major injuries, a massive skull fracture and evidence of strangulation with a garrote, a weapon fashioned from a length of nylon cord tied to a broken paintbrush handle. Both injuries were severe enough to be fatal, but the sequence of events has been debated for decades. The skull fracture suggested a violent blow to the head, delivered with significant force. Yet the absence of external bleeding implied JonBenet may have been struck while unconscious or after circulation had already been compromised. The strangulation, meanwhile, left clear ligature marks around her neck, along with deep furrows in the skin. Which came first? Did the assailant strike her, then strangle her to stage a scene? Or was the blow to the head a final desperate act after strangulation had already begun? The forensic record does not offer a clear answer, and experts remain divided. Beyond these primary injuries, other evidence complicated the picture. Fibers recovered from JonBenet's clothing matched materials from the Ramsey household. Microscopic examination showed similarities to Patsy Ramsey's clothing that morning. And then came one of the most controversial findings of all: DNA. Traces of unidentified male DNA were found in JonBenet's underwear. Modern analysis confirmed it did not belong to John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey. This discovery fueled theories that an intruder may have been involved. Yet critics pointed out that such touched DNA could have been transferred innocently, even during manufacturing of the garment. The autopsy also noted other injuries. There were abrasions and marks on her body that some experts interpreted as signs of prior abuse, though no definitive conclusion was reached. These findings deepened the mystery, leaving open questions about whether JonBenet's death was the result of a premeditated assault, a panicked accident, or something staged to mislead investigators. Forensic science was supposed to bring clarity. Instead, it left the case more tangled than ever. Every detail seemed to point in two directions at once: intruder or insider, accident or homicide, staged or real. The evidence did not solve the case. It split it wide open.
With the autopsy complete, investigators faced a disturbing reality. The science had not solved the case. It had only deepened the mystery. Two competing theories began to dominate. The first was the intruder theory. Proponents argued that someone broke into the Ramsey home that night. They pointed to the ransom note demanding $118,000, the unidentified male DNA on JonBenet's clothing, and the broken basement window. According to this view, an outsider committed the crime, wrote the note, and left undetected. But critics of the intruder theory pointed out major problems. There were no signs of forced entry beyond that window, and investigators later determined John Ramsey himself had broken it months earlier. The note was written on paper from inside the house. Why would a kidnapper waste time writing such a lengthy message on site? This led to the second major explanation, the family theory. Detectives noted fibers consistent with Patsy Ramsey's clothing on the duct tape and ligature. They argued the ransom note matched her handwriting style. And perhaps most compelling, JonBenet's body had been hidden in a basement room that only the Ramseys would have known so well. From here, another sub-theory emerged, the idea of a cover-up of an accident. According to this view, JonBenet may have suffered a fatal injury at home, possibly during an altercation with her brother Burke, and her parents staged the kidnapping and murder to protect him. Supporters of this theory highlighted the unusual wording of the ransom note and the fact that Patsy was the one who discovered it. Yet none of these theories could be fully proven. Every piece of evidence seemed to contradict itself. The DNA pointed outward, but the fibers and handwriting pointed inward. The autopsy suggested deliberate violence, but the staging of the crime hinted at panic. Meanwhile, the media transformed the case into a cultural phenomenon. The Ramseys appeared on national television pleading their innocence. Tabloids speculated endlessly about guilt, cover-ups, and conspiracies. America became obsessed with the question splitting households, workplaces, even friendships. Was it an intruder, or was it someone inside the Ramsey home?
Perhaps the most controversial figure in the Ramsey case was not John or Patsy, but their 9-year-old son, Burke. Initially, police cleared him, stating that he was asleep during the night of the murder. But years later, public suspicion began to grow. Viewers were unsettled when Burke appeared on national television as an adult, smiling oddly while discussing his sister's death. To many, it felt inappropriate, as if he were hiding something. This fueled the so-called Burke theory. According to this version, JonBenet may have been accidentally struck by Burke during a sibling argument, perhaps over a toy or a late-night snack, and their parents staged the crime to protect him. Supporters of this theory point to the weapon, a heavy flashlight found in the Ramsey kitchen. Experts suggested it could have caused the blunt force trauma to JonBenet's skull. Burke's fingerprints were not on it, but neither were anyone else's. The theory gained explosive attention in 2016 when a high-profile documentary series implied Burke was responsible. Outraged, he sued CBS for defamation and later settled for millions of dollars. Yet legally, Burke remains entirely uncharged. The district attorney's office repeatedly emphasized that there is no conclusive evidence against him. The DNA still points to an unidentified male, not Burke. But in the court of public opinion, doubt lingers. Was Burke just a child who tragically lost his sister? Or was he the hidden secret the Ramseys spent decades protecting?
The final hope in the JonBenet Ramsey case lies not in witness statements or theories, but in science. Back in 1996, forensic technology was still primitive. Investigators recovered DNA from JonBenet's clothing, but at the time, databases were small and methods were limited. What they found was puzzling. The DNA did not belong to John, Patsy, or Burke. It belonged to someone unknown. Over the years, thousands of comparisons were run against suspects, yet no matches ever appeared. Every time the spotlight turned towards someone new, the DNA cleared them. But technology has advanced. In 2022, the case was transferred to a specialized lab using the same genetic genealogy techniques that helped capture the Golden State Killer decades after his crimes. The hope is that one day, a relative of JonBenet's killer will unknowingly submit their DNA to an ancestry database, and the truth will finally surface. For now, though, the Ramsey case remains unsolved. It is a story of beauty pageants, wealth, suspicion, media frenzy, and above all, a child whose life was cut short. More than 25 years later, one haunting question remains. Who killed JonBenet Ramsey? And will we ever truly know?
The JonBenet Ramsey case remains one of the most haunting mysteries in American history. But now, the question is for you. Who do you think is responsible? Was it the family, a stranger, or someone no one has ever suspected? Share your theory in the comments below. Maybe together, we can connect the missing pieces. And if you want to see more deep dives into the world's darkest mysteries, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.